Dear all, many thanks for joining the third episode of the ALDA Talks. Today we will talk about communication strategies and new tools for non-profit organization. And we will do it together with Dorothee Fischer and Irene Negri. Dorothee Fischer is a communication and international affairs expert that has more than 15-year experience. She regularly collaborates with European institutions, NGOs, universities, and private companies worldwide. And she is specialized in drafting communication strategies and developing innovative communication tools. In the past, she works as a communication and project development officer, and she also has experience as a freelance journalist and producer. Furthermore, she was working for ALDA office in Strasbourg. And then Irene Negri is one of our colleagues. She is ALDA communications officer, and she holds a master's degree in intercultural communication. She has been living in 5 different countries across the world, and she has been working in the past as journalist, refugees, settlement worker, English teacher, and youth exchange program coordinator. Regarding the webinar, after this first brief introduction, Dorothee will take the floor and will discuss about the core topic of today's presentation. Irene will present some case studies and different tools that you can use for your own projects. And the end of the webinar will be open for your questions. Finally, I would like to give you a few tips on how to use the GoToWebinar platform. On the top right, you can see an orange arrow that allows you to expand or collapse the control panel. Just below there is a microphone. If it is orange, it means that it's muted. If it is green, it's on. You can click on it, and please keep it off for the entire duration of the presentation. If you want during the presentation to ask some questions, you can easily use the questions section, and we will answer your question at the end of the webinar. So from my side, it's all, and I will give the floor to Dorothee for the talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eva, for this short introduction. I hope everybody can hear me. It's very nice to do this webinar. As Eva said, I've worked for ALDA for 5 years myself. It's quite a long time ago because I left ALDA, I think, in 2008. Ever since I've been living in Spain, and I've worked in very different communication positions for European programs, but also now for more than 6 years I've been a freelancer, and I'm dealing with a variety of clients. I'm working directly with the EU institutions, but also with the private sector, with universities, and this has gained me quite an insight into different setups. I know today's topic is to focus on non-profit organizations. I'm trying to take this into consideration, but this is actually where I started, so this is good. I mean, this is the root of my communications experience with ALDA, and I'm still actually today the ambassador for Spain in ALDA, so I always keep in touch with the network. I think it would be nice. I'm seeing 12 participants now that have signed up or that are connected. It would be great, you know, that there's this chat function. If you could just tell us your name and where you are actually connected today, and maybe also in one word if you are actually a communications expert or dealing already with communications, because that's for me an interesting information. Because obviously when I prepared this webinar, it's not so easy to prepare a webinar when you don't know your exact target group and the level of experience. So I think it would be nice if everybody could just present themselves very briefly in the chat, and we know who's connected. I'm actually in Valencia today in Spain, and I think Irene and Eva are in Vicenza. You're in the Vicenza office, exactly. So we already have Italy and Spain represented this morning. I don't know where else in Europe or even outside of Europe you're located today. Do you see?
We have Elisa from Italy, Theo and Gary from France, and Arianna from Italy as well, but they're all in Skopje right now in the ALDA office. Then we have Stephanie from CRISP EV in Berlin. Gorsev Arkin from Istanbul, Turkey, working in Association of Urban and Society Studies.
So it's nice to see you here. You can still add your name and where you're from even later during the talk, because it's of course nice for everybody to see who's around. So
I have Shadi, former communication intern at UNICEF Iran, who is now here in Vicenza with us. Yes.
Okay, great. So welcome, Shadi, as well. That's nice. Okay, this is my first slide that I prepared as a little introduction, because I thought, okay, where are we actually standing right now? And obviously, when we're talking about communications, there's always a lot of big terms floating around, and I try to put them in this little word cloud. It's like communication, information, dissemination, capitalization, publicity. Obviously, it's not our task now to define all these terms, but it's obviously also it's important to know that this is the area that we're moving in, and also what has changed in these past years. I've been around now, I've been in this profession for almost 20 years now, and I've seen the trends changing. When I started, everybody was talking still about information. It's quite interesting. No, so it has had this unidirectional touch. We are communicating, we're informing people from top to bottom. We're informing them of what we're doing. We don't really care what they think about it. Obviously, nowadays, the communication is more bi-directional. It's much more interactive. People are much more involved. We have ambassadors, we have journalists, citizens journalists. So basically, a lot of people are communicating, not only professionals. That's sometimes also adding up to a little bit of confusion. Yeah, so things have been changing. I think tools have also become more accessible. This is the second trend. We have tools are much cheaper. It's the age of the sharing economy. We can actually buy subscriptions to certain tools. We don't have to own the tools any longer. We have the digital tools like the smartphone, which makes also everybody a communicator again, which again is also one of the difficulties, because if it's so accessible, everybody is communicating, and often there's a lot of non-quality work around as well. That's what I've seen, and also I think it's the question: do I have to be the super expert in everything since I'm doing communications? Do I have to be the super video maker, the super graphic designer, the super journalist, or where's a bit the limit in that? And I know what's the reality in a non-profit organization, because this is where I come from, and often obviously budgets are not so big as in international organizations, let's say, on big EU programs. And the more money you have available, the more help you can also use or contract. But a general rule or like an advice that I can give you, I've learned as a communications expert not to be the super expert in everything. And I know sometimes it's not possible. When there's no budget, I have to do everything. I have to do the newsletter, I have to do the video, etc. But once there's a little bit more budget available, I always ask myself, what's my strongest capacity as a communicator? And in my case, for example, it's the journalistic work, it's putting the content into the right formats, writing the texts, setting up the whole scene. And one part that I personally don't like so much is the technical part, graphic design or the video editing. And I've learned, if ever it's possible, I get the experts on board to have a quality product. And that's also an advice I can give to everybody, because often it's even saving money, because the time you save or the time you spend on your real expertise, let's say, you can also pay somebody, for example, a graphic designer, for 2 hours to do a very nice quality product, and I probably would have spent a whole day or two on the same result. So just keep this in mind. You don't have to be the superhero and everything when you work in communications. Let's move on. One other thing I've also observed, and this is maybe leading already to the main topic of today, that organizations and projects often lack strategy in their communication approach. And again, when you are in a very small organization, let's say when I worked for ALDA, I think ALDA was we were about 4 or 5 people at the very beginning. So we were a small team and communication was very direct. So we didn't need a communication strategy because we had the regular team meetings. Everybody knew what was going on and what we were aiming for. Once your team is growing 5 or 10 or more people, you have to use more systems. That's the thing I've learned. You have to share knowledge, you have to establish processes, and you have to make sure that everybody's working towards the same goal. And even you have to build a team and set up internal communication rules. So that's a bit the setup for the, like, let's say, the team. Then what I also see in the projects is that sometimes communication is like the last thing on the list, let's say. It's like it's treated as the add-on. Okay, when we have money left in one project, we may produce a brochure or we may produce a video before the end of the project. And that has happened to me. That has happened to me even as an expert now, as a freelancer, that people have contracted me a video in that case, for example, that was never disseminated in the end. Very frustrating experience, because the project was over. It was the very last, in the very last phase of the project, so there was no time to disseminate it. That's obviously a problem. And what else? Often I see also a very random selection of tools that people don't really think about what makes sense for their target group, for their objective. We're going to talk about that in a little while in more detail. But it's important to know, I mean, it's good to take some time to think about which tools make sense and who are my target groups. And then I've also seen people trying desperately to follow trends, wanting to be present everywhere. Obviously, that's also something that's happening in communications today. There's always new tools popping up, especially in the digital world. We have, I mean, whatever. Now, for example, Instagram may be very trendy, or for my kids, it's TikTok. I haven't even used that very much. I just see them sometimes using my smartphone, and they like these TikTok videos. You have to ask yourself, do I have to hop on every trend? Is that really useful for my organization? For example, Instagram, I don't think everybody has to be on Instagram. If you don't have very good photos or good stories to share, you don't have to be on Instagram, and it's not going to change the world. I mean, it's not going to like make your project fail because you're not on Instagram. So ask yourself really what makes trends and what makes sense, and also keep in mind that trends are coming and going. I still remember, I think that's also like 10 years ago, there was this this second, what's it called again? It was like a digital world, and everybody wanted to be in that digital world. I forgot now the name of it, but so basically that was a trend that came, and 2 years ago it was gone again. So make sure that you select trends that are staying and that make long-term sense for you. Then the last problem I put, and I'm sure that those of you that are working in communications right now have experienced this, that especially because nowadays tools are so accessible and they're not very expensive, people like your bosses or your colleagues completely underestimate the efforts and the time needed to produce quality products and communications. And it starts with videos again. Like, you, of course, I can take my smartphone to a meeting and record a short clip, but it doesn't mean that the audio is right. It doesn't mean that that the logos are right, because you have to do an editing to get a real video. So there's a whole process behind it, and the same also for publications. If you want a publication ready for a certain event, it needs planning and it needs time, and the colleagues often forget about it. And that leads me to my next slide. I put this little graphic together. You see, my technical knowledge is not the best, so I did a little canvas here last week. I often have the feeling that with communications people, we're swimming a little bit against the tide, because like as an example, when we're all coming back from our summer holidays and people are still exchanging on where they went on holidays, I'm already thinking of the Christmas campaign. I'm already starting to think about the post, like the Christmas cards we're going to send out. I'm thinking about what we're going to do in 3 months' time. And basically, the communications people are always 2 or 3 months ahead, at least, of the entire team. And that sometimes leads to tensions, that also leads to the situation that we always have to fight to keep the deadlines. And also, obviously, I'm not alone. I need often the input from the content experts, let's say, that I am working with in my team. And often they see that an event is very far away and they don't see why they should already deliver. And so I have to push the team a lot around me to make sure that things are working out. What I'm trying to establish in every project, this is the next slide, is a calendar. Again, that may sound like what kind of super obvious advice is this? We're all working with calendars. I put it here because I've met so many projects that are not using a real calendar among themselves. They know maybe there are 2 or 3 key events in the year, but they don't really work. I mean, they don't really have a real planning, and even weekly planning, monthly planning, because for me as a communications person, that's the basis, and that's the basis for all the quality work. Because now the example that I put here is something I have in most of my projects, especially in the social media calendars or projects I'm running. I'm starting with a calendar where I put the like the UN thematic days. This, of course, is not relevant for all the projects, but I'm putting this as an example because often if we know, let's say, which one can we choose here? International Women's Day in March is a good one because many organizations are doing something for that. Maybe you could decide to organize an event. Maybe you would like to gather some key statistics that you've done in your organization and prepare an infographic or a video from some of your project managers that have worked on gender equality, let's say. So this International Day gives you a deadline for certain communication products that you'd like to prepare. And like this actually goes for everything. The thematic days or certain days may lead to certain events, and the events may give you deadlines for certain tools that need to be ready. And I'm trying to establish this kind of calendar on all the projects I'm working with, but also depending on the cultural background, I have to say that I've noticed for some it's easier to plan in advance than for others. And so I know sometimes it's not even possible because a lot of things obviously don't depend only on your organization. It depends on the people you work with, your networks. Then there's also projects where you have international conferences that you don't decide. So I'm aware that there has to be a flexibility, and you always have to update this calendar regularly. Okay. So how do you reach your desired audiences with the right tools? Again, I put here an example. The example from my recent work, basically, because I realized that again it was a technical assistance project I did, and one thing I often realize, and that goes back a little bit to the lack of planning, is I sat down with a couple of people and they said, yeah, I would like to do a brochure, and what do you think about this layout and this layout, and do you like the color blue, and should we put our contact detail at the end, and they started straight away the meeting with me, entering in all sorts of details, and I said, stop, let's go back. I mean, I'm sure it's good to have a brochure, but can you explain to me in the first place, why do you want to produce this brochure? What is the objective behind this? Who do you want to reach? Are you sure you're going to disseminate the brochure to the people you want to reach? Is there an event where you can do it? Do you want to send it by post? Or do you want to distribute it online through a newsletter? And what is the main message about it that you would like to deliver? In this case, it was a brochure. I put like XXX or XXX on the slide because obviously this is an example that you can transfer to many other areas. This is I see often people entering straight away the details of a product without stepping back and asking themselves, does this really make sense? And is this really what I want to do? And will I reach my target group with this? And I often, when I work with my clients, I make them answer the right questions. And I think this is an approach that I can, or this is an advice I can give in general. As a communications expert, you don't have to know all the answers, because obviously communications is a horizontal task. I'm dealing with projects that are very different, and maybe an environmental project, a health project, a cultural one. So my contents are always changing, and every time I have a new project, I have to spend at least 1 or 2 days reading about the contents to get to know them. So but then I have to know who is the person who can answer these questions. So it's probably a team that you're working with. It's probably the content managers or the people running the organizations, and you sit together and you have your little questionnaire and you answer the different questions. So I think this is a good advice, and basically it's always coming to down to the same questions, as you will see also in my second part when I tell you how I usually draft an entire communication strategy. Okay. Now we had the example of the brochure. Basically, the same is also true for events. Communication around events is very similar. And I've now my practice is that I really split it up into 3 phases. There's a pre-event phase, during the event, and a post-event communications phase, because basically the needs in communications are different. And also according to the event, I mean, starting with the question, do I have to mobilize participants? Because we know there may be events that are more closed. They're not open to the general public. Maybe we only want to communicate on the results, and we don't want to invite people because we already have the group of people that are invited. Then the question, as I said before, are there any communication tools that I need to have ready for the event? Do I want to distribute any flyers? Do I want to roll up? I mean, it's something sometimes very basic to more complicated tools. And then when we move to the event phase, we have to ask ourselves, do I have, especially in social media also, do I do live tweets? Do I want to do photography, video? Do I need somebody to take notes for a report? Will I send out a press release? In general, do I want to have media outreach activities linked to the event, or is it maybe more a work meeting of a project, so it doesn't really attract journalists? So all these kind of questions you have to ask yourself. And then obviously you also have the post-event phase where you share the results. You may produce a newsletter, you may set up a Flickr account with the photos, you may share the news on your Facebook page with the photo gallery, etc. So there's a whole series of activities after that. Again, what I can in general recommend to be more strategic and to make sure, especially when you're a team of people, that everybody is on the same line or wavelength. Draft a concept note. Start when you organize your event to draft a concept note where you again answer all the questions. Why am I doing this event? What are my target groups? What's the context? What's the methodology? What are the expected results? And then you can even also list your planned communication activities. Like this, everybody is on board, can support you, and you can work in a team. If you're like a team of 2 or 3 people, this may not be necessary, but again, like once you're a growing team and you have bigger events, this is for me often the success factor, and it saves you a lot of time in emailing back and forth or answering questions. So these were now examples that I gave you on strategic approaches in communications. What I do more and more, and this has also been a trend, I've seen in many EU projects and programs, drafting a real communication strategy is more and more obligatory when you ask for funding as an organization, and it's also more and more a practice even for organizations themselves to say, okay, this is our organization. We'd like to make sure that we don't only have an annual plan, like a strategic plan for our activities, but this is also accompanied by a real communication strategy. And maybe also just a side note on the terminology. Often I talk about communication strategy when it's more like a long-term approach, when we're talking about several years. So maybe like a 5-year plan, let's say something like this, a 5-year strategy, sorry. And then often this breaks down to annual communication plans. And often this is linked then also to your annual work plan. This helps to make, I mean, the communication strategy basically is the bigger picture, it's guiding us, and the communication plan are then the concrete steps. I mean, the link to the calendar, let's say, what I've presented before, knowing what you have to produce when and when in the year. And so it gives you a bit like the roadmap for your annual activities. Okay. So how to start with the communication strategy? Again, it's really about asking the right questions and taking your time, your reflection time, to answer them. I will, as a little giveaway from this webinar, I've prepared a little form that I will send to you, or we will upload it, or we will send it to all the participants, because basically it's the form with the questions or the different categories I'm using in all my communication strategies. And I've done communication strategies for EU programs that are quite large, even outside the EU. I've done it for EU projects on a smaller level. I've done it for organizations. Basically, I'm always using the same form. Some of the projects are more complex, because when it's like, let's say, a project that is working with a lot of different networks or different people, it's becoming a little bit like bigger. And I have to add sometimes more time in digging out the information. But sitting down and having like a very basic communication strategy I'm doing in my seminars, when I give seminars or trainings, and after half an hour basically everybody has like the grid for his own communication strategy, which he then write in a real text. And the text can be, sometimes the communication strategy is 3 pages, 5 pages. Sometimes I have communication strategies up to 80 pages, just to let you know the scope, depending really on the project that I'm working on. But so it's not like, the aim is not to have a super long document. If it's not necessary in your personal setup or for your organization, don't bother. Just make sure all the information that I'm presenting now in the next slides is in there, and you share it with your team so that you're all on the same line. Basically, that's the aim behind it. Okay, so I always start with the bigger, like the roof, let's say. What are the objectives of my project, my context, my organization? Because that's basically, that sets the tone, that sets the context. And what's the objective? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this project? Do I want to raise awareness? Do I want to mobilize people? Do I want to change attitude, solve a conflict, lead to an agreement, call for action? I mean, these are just examples, but basically, first of all, I have to know what my project is about. And then as a second step, what are the communication objectives of this project? So the examples that I put here are obviously more linked already to communications. But sometimes in some projects, when a project is a campaign, the objectives of the campaign and the communication objectives are almost the same. But obviously, if you're an organization, you have a general strategic objective of your organization, and then the communication objectives are linked with that and are helping to reach those strategic objectives. Okay. Then as a second step, and very important, who are my target groups, the beneficiaries? For whom am I doing this, or who do I want to reach? And sometimes, like mistakes I've seen here, is that you list everybody, basically. Obviously, from the general public, which is a very vague term, and I don't like it very much, to like all sorts of different interest group and people you work with, etc. This can be very confusing, although it may be true, because I mean, we all know, once you have a Facebook page, in general, the Facebook page is open to the general public, and this is how you also reach everybody. But let's try to be more strategic. And what I sometimes do in that case is, when there's too many people, too many target groups, I split them up into the main target groups and the secondary target groups, and even multipliers. Many of the people we're working with may only be multipliers. They may disseminate our messages or our products and help us, but they're not maybe our main target group that we want to reach. So make sure you distinguish a little bit what's the main focus of your communication. And then once you've listed those different groups and people, you have to ask yourself, which information do they actually need? Which information do they already have? What's their level of knowledge? What's their vocabulary? Like maybe you have to, I mean, obviously when you want to reach young people, you have to adapt a different language than when you have a very high level communication with institutions. So you have to adapt the language and the messages to that. And you also have to imagine how they will react to your communication or to your products. So all these are things to be kept in mind. Then, yeah, I already mentioned the messages, the content of my project, the context again. What am I actually communicating about? And here again, what are the main messages of my project and for which target group? I often have a grid even. I draft like a grid where I put the target group, the tool and the messages together in a grid, so I can really adapt my messages to each target group. And I also ask myself, what's the purpose of my project? What is the project about? So I mean, these are big questions, but I think this is very, very important to know or to define it when you draft your messages. And one of my favorite exercises, unfortunately, we cannot do it in this setup because it's a webinar. Usually I'm doing that when I'm giving the trainings, is that I ask people to prepare an elevator pitch. I don't know if you've heard about it. I can just briefly explain what it is, and you can practice it then in your bathroom, maybe at home or maybe with your friends. Basically, it's the idea that you use the time of an elevator journey. Let's say you step into an elevator and you're going to the 7th floor in a building, and you're meeting somebody, and that person asks you, so what are you doing? What is your project about? And or you can imagine an elevator journey is not very long. You may have 25 seconds, something like this. And you have to explain maybe what your institution is about, what your project is about, the main essence of your project. And it's a very good exercise. I've done this with a lot of people. I've done this even with the camera on. We filmed the people and then the people watch themselves again. If you have difficulties in putting the main essence of your project in 25 seconds, you can also not write 10 pages about it. You know, it's like you need to have this super clear, and it's also very, very useful when you give interviews to the media, because basically these are the little snippets, this, as we call it, sound bites in the media language, that they often use when they record an interview. You may know that they only take out little pieces like 20 seconds, 25 seconds usually, and they do a feature story about it. And basically these are the seconds that the journalists use because they're super clear. You have one clear message in one short period of time. So knowing your pitches, knowing your sound bites is very, very useful, and it's a very useful exercise for you as a communications person, also for your colleagues. I'm sometimes doing it with my colleagues, because often obviously it's not me giving the interview to the press, but it's the head of the organization or the project manager. So I'm always trying to help my colleagues to get these elevator pitches right, and we practice them beforehand, before an event or an interview. Okay. Then obviously the most important thing, and as I said before, the tools. So now I know who I want to reach. I know basically the main messages I want to get across, which are the appropriate tools to reach my target groups. And I also always try to define like sub-objectives or tactics per tool, meaning, for example, if I, let's say, decide to produce a brochure, first of all, I have to decide how many copies I will produce and how many I will disseminate and how. I think that's very important, because also that gives you already a means of measuring your results and your successes afterwards. And it's not so easy, I know, because sometimes, for example, when we're talking about the social media, it may be difficult to say, okay, where do I want to go? What do I want to reach? Do I want to reach 1,000 followers? Do I want to have a viral tweet? What is a viral tweet? From how many impressions onwards is a tweet viral? It's what I often do in that case, because it can be very different, is I'm trying to do a little benchmark. And that means I'm looking what others are doing. I'm looking at organizations that work in the same field. For example, okay, I'm setting up a new social media tools for a new organization that has just been created. So I'm looking at organizations that are working in the same field, that are doing similar things, and I'm looking how many followers do they have after whatever 5 years of of exercising this. So that gives me a benchmark. Okay, I'd like to reach at least the same amount of followers as they have, and of course even more. And the same for other tools. I think this is always a good exercise. Look at what your colleagues and your neighbors are doing, and it may give you hints where you want to go. Okay. Then as the next step, when you've defined all your tools, your target groups, your messages, you have to set a timeline. And that's again, basically that's the calendar again. In many projects, when you apply for funding, they even ask you for this Gantt chart, as they call it in the EU project world. So you have to define the months when you're doing what. It's very useful also. I mean, this is the other thing. One thing is the planning in the general calendar. The other thing is that you see actually when there are linkages. I mean, it starts with you producing a video and you want to do a campaign once the video is ready. Obviously, you cannot start the campaign before the video is ready, or you may only start a little bit with some making of images or so. So there's a linkage, and that's often the case. You cannot finalize the publication before you've done the interviews or before you've taken photos. So things are linked, and once you visualize that on a board like this timeline, it helps you to plan and also see the consequences. If there's a delay in one thing, you have to shift the whole the whole Excel file to the right, because everything will be delayed. So it's very important to do this exercise on a regular basis and update also your plans. Basically, this is like the annual plan that has to be, sometimes it has to be updated within the year, but at least once a year, you have to adapt everything and see where you are. Then another important question, of course, is my budget. And that defines, obviously, how many things you're doing in communications in the first place, how much money do I have available. Often I'm always asked, often people ask me, so how much money should I spend on communications when I have a new project? For example, when I apply for a new project, is there like a regular percentage that I should reserve for communication activities? It's not so easy, because obviously it depends also on the kind of project you're doing. If you're doing a campaign, it will be less, it will be more, sorry, because this is a communications project altogether. If it's only a part of a bigger project, then at least, I would say, at least you should have 10% reserved for communication activities. But again, this is like a reference. It depends a lot. But I think in general, we also see the importance of communications in our project is growing. People are according more importance to it. They see it's important to be visible and to show the results and the impact of what we're doing. So communications is important, and this is also reflected in the budgets of projects and organizations. And yeah, what I said, impact and results. We also have to, of course, think about the monitoring and evaluation of our performance. Sometimes this is forgotten, or people think about it too late. I mean, the worst mistake is to start thinking about your communication performance when you're writing your annual report or when you're writing your project final report, let's say, because obviously what you should do is establish ongoing monitoring tools, so you always have the statistics available. I mean, it starts from monthly website statistics and social media statistics. Collect them regularly, and don't collect them like 1 year later, because some of the statistics may not even be online any longer, or not the details you want. So I think it's good to monitor these type of things regularly, even for your own performance, because when you, for example, many projects, I write like a social media report every 2 or 3 months. And it's a good moment because we see, okay, in which direction are we going? What kind of posts are successful? How many people do we reach? Which posts go rather viral or not? And then we can redirect our publications in the upcoming months. We see what is successful and what is not, so we adapt. And that's obviously not only true for social media, but for everything. And then I put some key performance indicators now here as examples, such as number of participants, like the production of tools and how many you disseminate, like the brochures or publications, Press clippings, also a very important point, and often very important for the donors. Let's see, if we are presented in the media, it also means we're reaching a lot of people, so that's still a very important category. Then also things like participation in external events where we disseminate our results, we share the results that we're doing, and capitalization of results. I'm not sure, but basically it's transferring the results to other projects and making sure that they can be picked up, and that people don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can use your results and actually develop further the projects or the results as such. Okay, and of course, to measure impact is not always easy in communications. We could have a whole seminar now only on evaluation communication, because obviously impact is sometimes not so direct, and it's sometimes very difficult to measure if it goes back to your communication efforts or not. So just keep this in mind. But whatever we can document is positive and on an ongoing basis, I think is the advice I'd like to give. I'd like to hand over now to my colleagues from ALDA, because they will share with you how they're doing it as a case study. Yes, Irene. So unless there are questions still to my part for the moment, maybe Irene can take over, but don't hesitate to put questions in the chat now or later. We are here, of course, to answer them. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Dorothee. Hello, everybody. Thank you for participating. So yes, I will add to what Dorothee has told us so far with a couple of case studies from ALDA. The first is very, very current for us. It's our 20th anniversary communication strategy. You may know that ALDA was born at the very end of 1999. So this year, 2020, we celebrate for the whole year our 20th anniversary of activity. And we decided to go big, but without ever forgetting the focus of this initiative, which is our members. So just like Dorothee was saying, it is important to think about the key questions before you start anything. And our why was to thank our members, and how we thought of several ways to do it that we're still improving and perfecting as we go. So one of the things we want to do is to have our members at the core of everything, hence the hashtag, the member, and our motto. This is really what we think about in every step of our celebration this year and all the events and initiatives that are part of it. So for example, we hired a researcher to work on the publication of the results and outcomes of our activities for the past 20 years. In December, we already hosted a free training for members, which lasted for 2 days here in Vicenza. It was about EU funding opportunities, the 2021-2027 strategy, and project cycle management. It is also open to non-members in the hope that maybe they are intrigued to become members. And we are hosting the next one in March on the 17th and 18th. Registrations are open, so please feel free to tell us about it if you're interested. And as you know, we are hosting these ALDA Talks. Clearly, you know about them. They're webinars that we've been starting in December. Dorothee, who is an ALDA member herself, presented our communication. Last time, for example, it was the municipality of Lusada who talked to us about environmental practices. There are a whole range of topics, and we're hoping to give something back to our members, and not only in this respect. We're also launching a new exciting logo for ALDA. I've seen it, and we can't wait to release it together with a new website that we're working on. And there is more, because as I was saying, we keep thinking of new ideas and trying to make this year as memorable as possible for everybody and as interesting as possible. So actually, I was saying that our focus is our members, because we want to thank them for everything we've done together. But we also clearly focus on non-members, because yeah, they might be interested in becoming members of ALDA or just to participate in some of our initiatives. The General Assembly this year will also be special and quite unique, because before the actual General Assembly, we will host a 2-day event in Pula, in Croatia. including educational and networking activities and workshops for members and held by the members. So this is an occasion we want to give them to showcase what they do and network with one another. We're talking about 350 members from 45 countries. So this is quite a networking opportunity, and the workshops can be performances, can be interactive, and as original as each member wants. And we want to give a sense of family to ALDA and what we do. Because it is a membership-based organization, there is literally quite little we could do by ourselves. It wouldn't really make sense. So this is why we really want everybody to know that we appreciate them very much. There will also be a marketplace we have thought of for local authorities to showcase their area and what it has to offer, the products and projects, and leisure member moments, and a lot of other little ideas that I don't want to spoil too much right here, right now. So just quickly to show you the visual identity we have thought for different aspects of these 2020 celebrations. This is the General Assembly visual identity. You may or may not like the color. We thought it would be of impact. Then we have the ALDA Talks, which you will have seen. These are the next ones coming up. Then we have Info Days. This is more on the ALDA Plus side of ALDA, which might not be as well known because it's more recent, but it's about technical assistance and trainings. So we have created these Info Days, which will happen soon in Vicenza, Skopje, and Brussels in our offices. They're also a good way to see our new office spaces in Vicenza and Brussels, as we have recently moved. And then we just launched this yesterday in English, and we'll soon do it in French and Italian as well. This is, again, an opportunity we want to give to our members to be showcased on our social media. So they're encouraged to send us a picture that represents them and a few lines about how being part of ALDA was beneficial for them and advantages, and what their next projects are, so that we can all get to know one another better. Again, since it's about 350 members, we clearly don't manage to talk about each of them every day, or very often anyway, but we do want to know that, want them to know that they are in our thoughts, they're in our heart, and we value each and every project we do together. So this was the overview of our 20th anniversary campaign. We hope you're as excited as we are about it. And again, more is coming. We're working on an app. We're working on a series of cultural events. So we're doing everything we can to reach everybody and for everybody to find something that relates to them. The second case study is actually a mix-up of different case studies that include common mistakes and pitfalls we can all make. Nobody's perfect, no try our best, but whatever your communication is about, there are some risks for everybody to incur. And there are some questions that, again, we encourage everybody and we keep encouraging ourselves to ask. So first of all, who am I? In my case, I am communication officer for an NGO that is about local democracy and citizen participation in the enlarged Europe. Again, a membership-based organization, and I, as communication officer, cannot forget that. I can't forget that the geographic area we cover is this big. Why can't I? Because obviously this means a lot of cultural differences too, and it would be wrong if I communicated from my own point of view as an Italian living in Italy, which is clearly different from, well, I live in northern Italy, which is already different from the south. So imagine all of those differences that we can have in that geographic area with that many people who follow us. On Facebook, we have over 8,000 followers. So I can just start to imagine our different lives and beliefs and values. We have something in common, and that's what we need to communicate on. So this is an example from last year when an intern inadvertently posted something that enraged some people, as you can see from the reaction. So he clearly meant well. He wished Happy Easter. He had the best intentions, yet it it resulted in an angry reaction because someone didn't feel represented. Someone who followed us was feeling that we discriminated them and that we weren't being equal to everybody. And that's a fair point. So for example, for the festive season last year, of course, in Italy, we celebrate Christmas, and most people do anyway. And we could be tempted as communications officers who are based here to write all the wishes you a happy Christmas. But that would only apply to a portion of the people who we work with and who we communicate to. So we went for ALDA wishes you happy holidays instead, and sort of generic message of wishes that is more about the new year. And the example in Arabic is to show that we didn't actually translate exactly, literally, the sentence. This is Kul am wa antum bikhair, and it more or less means well wishes for the new year, and it's exactly the way that people would wish it in Arabic. So we decided to adapt it. We try our best to adapt everything to be as accurate as possible for who will read it. Another question to ask is, am I doing something legal? Am I doing it well? These are 3 news that are published on our website, and you can see one is a picture we took, another one is a visual we made on Canva. And then this news was about something that hadn't happened yet. We wanted to announce it, so we didn't have any actual picture of it, and we needed to find something to go with it. But there comes the trick. You can't just Google images or any other kind of browser. We use Unsplash and Pexels. They're just 2 examples of platforms where you can find free stock pictures, where you don't need to give credit, or anyway you're not taking images that you're not in the right of using. Then a slide on being correct. That's what I called it, because again, there is cultural sensitivity, but there is also another aspect that is merely, I don't know, knowledge-based in our case. Again, we cover a great geographic area, and we need to mention different projects in different countries where they speak different languages. We need to think about how to communicate best. And sometimes we might all be tempted to think that we know things when we actually don't know them, or maybe we know them as they used to be true, but they're not anymore. So here's a little quiz. Like, some parts of it will certainly be easy for all of you. So do I say America? When I say America, do I mean the American continent or the United States of America? And Macedonia, is that really still the name of that country? Or what are the official languages in Belgium? Do I know all of them? Do I know their actual name? And then immigrants, should I use this word? Should I maybe say migrants? Is it appropriate to what I'm trying to convey? So these are all questions that I invite you to think about as kind of a self-exam, and anything else that may come up to mind where we think, oh yeah, I know this, but hey, maybe I don't. So I'll just check it before I put it out in the world where 8,000 followers can see it. Bonus question is, who writes a newsletter in 6 languages? You would think, oh, that's crazy how well we do. ALDA writes a newsletter in English, Italian, French, Arabic, Serbo-Croatian, and Russian. This is again a choice we made to be more inclusive with our audience. So some questions that we suggest using for yourself is, well, am I unconsciously being ethnocentric? Is this discriminating? Is this possibly making someone feel excluded or like I don't care about them? Is this legal? Thinking about creative contents and rights. And is this correct? Have I checked this info? Am I fully sure? This applies to, obviously, to a lot of things. Presented it, what's their last name, how is it spelled, but is it the same thing to use the C, the normal C, or the C with the different signs on top or bottom? And of course, these are all details to pay attention to. Then the final question can be, is there a better way to do this? And of course, the answer is 99% of the times, yes. Sometimes the best possible way maybe isn't reachable because of those resources that we were already talking about with Dorothee, like money or time or competence. But usually there is at least a slightly better way to do things if we look a second time. So that is all. Thank you again very much for your attention and your participation. And if you have any questions, we would be glad to answer. Otherwise, we will thank Dorothee again. Oh, I read now that you could barely hear me. I'm sorry about it. I tried to talk as loudly as possible.
I also just invite you. I put my contact, like my Twitter contact and my email on the last slide. So if you have any additional questions or don't hesitate to contact me. You know where to find me. And hopefully also at a future ALDA event again. I haven't been participating in the General Assembly in these past years. I think it's always difficult to fit it in, but I'd like to come this year. Let's see if I can manage and meet some of you.
We would like to see you.
Great.
Yes, we would like to see you for sure.
Yes.
So, by the way, we didn't introduce one of the participants before. It was Katerina from Ukraine, an Erasmus Mundus joint master student in international development studies, currently studying in Pavia. So we hope you're happy in Pavia, Katerina, and everything is going well.
Yeah, and great to see the international audience today. I mean, Istanbul, Ukraine, etc. It's Berlin. Great.
Iran, yes.
The digital world. Yeah.
Well, then, thank you. We will still be available for questions if you want to maybe email us later. If you have second thoughts, of course, we're always available.
And we share the slides with all of you. Yes, of course.
Yes.
Bye-bye then.
Bye. Bye-bye.